or a big rim bowl, I always take that finish and I stick it right in the center, because I don't want any excess going over the edge or under the edge. My second pass would now feather that finish to the inside rim, and then I would bring that out to the outside bead and around the outside curve. That way there is no excessive finish right off the hop pooling down around that corner and then dripping a big teardrop down the inside of your bowl, or dripping that teardrop around here and down the backside of your bowl. I would then leave that to dry. The only coats that I wipe off are the ones that have sat there. This is no longer going to absorb that finish. So I would take my mineral oil, spirits. Since if I wipe with it, it's going to catch all the fibers, they're going to fray, they're going to leave fibers in that wood. I'm not too worried about it right now because it's still absorbing it like a sponge, and I'm going to sand that with about a 500. If it's really bad, a 400. Take off any lint or fluff. Once that has a build-up of finish, I would only sand with 800. And then this is no longer catching, fraying, and leaving all these strings over my finish.
You said that it's absorbing like a sponge. And on the other bowl, you have an end grain one. Is that any more or less absorbent? Like, does it absorb as much as the other style of bowl that you got?
I find the end grain will absorb more.
Okay. More
finish. The side grain, the face grain will absorb less finish because it's less porous. So in the end, this will take less coats. The side grain will always build up a finish before the end grain. The end grain, you always have to bring it up to that side grain finish, and then your next couple coats will just be totally uniform, and they'll just be building that sheen to whatever sheen you want. You can work your way through a natural, a satin, a semi-gloss, a gloss, a high-class gloss. So you can always, I like that too, because some things I do a matte finish, only if requested. If it's requested or it's what they want, that's what I'll do. But anything else, if I'm doing it and it's going into a gallery or a store or I'm doing a show, it's the finish I like. If I am doing a box, that would be bowls. If I'm doing the live edge bowl would be the exact same in the finish state. Start at the high side, work your way down, go with the grain, final pass with the grain, up and around out the top. You always come back up to the rim just in case there's excessive finish that's going to pool and drip down the outside or the inside of your bowl. Whenever you're doing, or whenever I'm doing a box, I always use my diluted finish. Once I'm past 5 coats, I use pure, just pure tongue oil. I only dilute it up to the first 5 coats because it's absorbing like a sponge. Once it is no longer absorbing like a sponge, I have a good base coat, and every top coat is a top coat and then building upon each layer. I just lost my train of thought.
You're doing a box.
You're doing a box. Your first 5 coats are diluted, and then as you start going on, you go pure.
Yeah, you go pure. So your first 5 coats diluted 50-50. Anything above that, once you have a good base coat, the end grain is the same as the side grain. It's no longer absorbing like a sponge. Then I would just do pure.
What do you do with the excess that you have diluted in your cat tin at the end of the day if you still got some?
I just pour it right back in the same container.
Usually.
Yes. Yeah. Even though it's diluted, I do it so much, and then I'll open another can, and then I'll use that can with that can. Or I'll use that as my diluted tongue oil, and then my new can as my pure tongue oil. But even if it is diluted ever so slightly, this is actually drying every time I open it and close it. It's going to lose some of those levelers and hardeners, and it's going to dry. So that actually keeps it a good consistency and fluid, so it doesn't dry up prematurely. I also do crush my cans to keep the oxygen out of there, so it doesn't dry up prematurely. But a can of this usually lasts me 6 to 8 months, even though I'm doing maybe 10 to 14 coats a bowl. Because I dilute it constantly, and then the last few coats are very light coats, and I don't wipe them off. Whenever I'm doing a box, again, it's a much steeper slope. So we're thinking of gravity again. Always start at the high side, work your way down, work your way back up to the high point, hoping that you got any drip or run. So I would start at the top on the inside, work my way down to the bottom. Once I get to the bottom, I go, if it's a large box that I can really reach, I would go with the grain. But this one's so small, it just holds my pad, and I go in a circle, it's totally covered. It's totally fine. It's the first couple coats anyway. And it's in end grain, so you're not really going to notice. I'm not going to sand anything off until I have built up a finish anyway. Once I've done that, working my way down, I would work my way back up. And then out the top. Whenever I do the connection of the box, the male-female connection where your lids go together, you want to use as much finish as possible, depending, again, how tight your lid is. If you have a loose lid, you could use more finish to create a tighter, or you could use less finish. If it's a tight fit, you want to use less finish, otherwise you'll build that up, and it will... Battery dead.
Okay. Wouldn't it just be easier to paint everything?
It would be, but I find after the wood has stopped absorbing the finish like a sponge, a paintbrush applies far too much finish. The paintbrush...
You can just paint it.
Oh yeah,
Sarcastic.
I guess you could just paint it, but if you used a paintbrush throughout the whole thing, the paintbrush applies far too much finish. Even if you work your way down, work your way back up, you're going to have pooling. So I always switch to the these, because you can control how much is absorbed and not absorbed. Once I've done the inside, working my way down, I do a light coat in that connection. Final pass here, and then I do the outside. Start at the top. Work your way down, work your way back up. I'm losing a spot where I can hold it.
Why wouldn't you go lengthwise? Wouldn't that be...
You can.
Too?
Yep.
Just personal preference.
Yeah, just personal preference. Once I went around that way, I hold it at the top here and here, and I will go sort of on an angle with the grain, working that down. Your final pass can be, if you have excessive finish, I would always go from bottom to top.
Lighting is very important.
Yeah, lighting's important so you can see the streaks and any runs. And then since my thumb was on the top here, I would just anywhere it was holding, and then I would do my final pass on the top there. Allow that to dry. If I'm doing a goblet or so, I would always start at the top. This one is actually the very first coat. So this one I would paint on. And it doesn't have to be pretty, you're just because the wood is going to absorb like a sponge. That I would just paint on. And then once it has cured slightly, I would wipe it off.
Turn this way a little bit. There you go.
Whatever excess hasn't absorbed, I would then wipe off. Since I can no longer hold it on the stem here, I would hold it here. And since this is the first coat, I would have done these when I did these two, and then come back, check them, and wipe off any pooling finish. Since my fingers were in there, and since gravity, all that is going to pool at the bottom, I would start at the bottom and feather it up to the rim. Since it is my very first coat and it's with a brush, it will have excess pooling on the inside of the goblet. Once I come back around, I can feather that back up. If it's really excessive, I wipe it off with mineral oil, just a mineral oil rag. And then the next coat will build upon that layer. If I'm doing a box that I cannot reach the inside of the box, I would do the start at the top, work my way down to a point where I couldn't reach. At that point, I would take my paintbrush and I would feather down the side to the bottom. I wouldn't take a brand new paintbrush that was just dipped in the finish, because then I'm going to have far too much finish pool at the bottom that I can now not get up the sides of the box. So I would take a brand new brush and I would start halfway up, bringing that excess finish down to the bottom, and then back up to the top, and I would leave that to dry. Once I've gone through my coats of finishing, I've done my final coat. I've gone through however many layers I've done on that specific wood. I can almost see myself in it. I can almost shave in it. I'm ready for buffing.
Doesn't shave that much.
Not in the winter.
It's not shiny enough.
Once I've built up my coats, I don't keep track of how many coats. Some people ask me how many coats. I say anywhere that wood. It's just experience with different woods. Maple absorbs less than birch. Birch will take more coats. Pine takes more coats than birch. Walnut, maple, honey, locust take probably the least amount of coats. If I'm doing an exotic wood or an ebony, they would take maybe 2 coats, 3 coats. So it all depends on the wood and the density of the wood and what sheen factor you want. But I go for a look, because I can't, when I have this much stuff on my table, I can't keep track. This has 3, that has 4, that has 8, that has 5. This one might actually have 8, and it looks like that one with 4 just because the different density, but I'm going for a look. Once I have that look and I'm happy with the finish and the sheen, I buff my pieces. When I'm buffing my pieces, I use micro mesh. Micro mesh is a wet sandpaper, a wet dry sandpaper. It starts at 1500. It starts at 1200 and it goes up to 12,000 grit. So whenever I sand in between coats, do my 500 for the first 1 to 5 coats, 5 to 10 coats, sand in between coats with 800. Once I'm above that, my final coat, I would buff with, say, a 1500, put my final coat on. The next day, I wet sand with these. I start at 1500. I usually have my favorite bowl. I just throw a bunch of water in there and throw all these in there. They don't all fit in these little cat things, so I actually use like my eating bowl, but it works good. That's when I have guests, they get that bowl. But I would dip them in 1500, go with the grain around the circumference